Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. I assure you we are here, even though you may not be able to see us. This StreamYard technology is having a little bit of a problem right now. It is very much old technology, so hopefully you guys can at least hear us.
Yeah, it looks like it's not on the visual side there, Brendan.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it either, but I am hearing us, so I do think we'll be okay. This is not ideal, but I guess we'll just have to go with it for tonight and just chalk it up to StreamYard not being in a not doing well tonight, and hopefully next week they're able to fix it. But I am Brendan, and the other voice that you will hear on this call tonight is Brandon. How are you doing tonight, Brandon?
I'm doing good, doing well. All right, we'll roll this way with it. We could try theoretically just off and on it if you want and see if just refreshing a new deal might make it, because I've never run into this before with them.
Yeah, I have heard people talk about StreamYard as being like out of date technology that a lot of people are abandoning in favor of just using straight up Discord. But yeah, so we'll see what happens next time we try to use it. But for tonight, I guess we're gonna have to go audio only. So Brandon, how you doing tonight?
Doing great, man. We got 3-0 team here rolling, so that's good to see, and yeah, all good on that side of it.
All right, so the Seattle Seahawks, like you said, moved to 3-0 with that win over Miami. I don't think there's a lot that really need to be said about that game. It was kind of a messy game. It was a game that was often not all that entertaining to watch, but it was the game that we had to play, and it's a game that we ended up winning by 3 touchdowns. So are you taking anything away from that game, or do you just have to say that Miami didn't really have much of a shot in that game, and it's just one of those things where sometimes you run into an opponent that can't really play with you?
I think yes, the Seahawks took care of business. They've been dealing with a lot of injuries there. I think there's some now raising questions about the coaching there down to I think you're playing them at home. They're definitely not feeling in their best, and you were able to jump in and take advantage of that. So I think that they handle business as much as anything else. They did what they should have done, and it's no small thing. As any given Sunday, anybody can go out there and go get the dub. So. Pulling this off and making it happen like they did, they still had Tyreek Hill, still had Waddle, still was dangerous enough, but it showed from the intensity standpoint that they showed up, they were ready to play, and they did what you're supposed to do as well with these teams, which is kind of get up on them early, and then you don't have to play a perfect ball game, but you can kind of then lean on them a bit through the game, and then fully put them away as you start to get closer down the stretch there.
Right. So honestly, when DK Metcalf rolled in for that 71-yard touchdown catch, and the score went 17-3 on the last play of the first quarter, I kind of felt like the game was over because we had already seen Miami's offense for a few drives. And I think that at that point, I had a pretty good sense that Miami was not going to be able to come back.
Yeah.
So I wasn't too upset about anything that happened after that. It was a little bit annoying maybe, but I wasn't sitting there thinking like, oh man, Skylar Thompson or Tim Boyle's going to lead some big comeback here.
No, I mean, I thought I definitely was still a little bit nervous because you did let him linger a little bit, and the offense went so cold there for a while where it just seemed to kind of completely find its footing and rhythm and pace. Luckily, they were very explosive early on, so they gave themselves some of that breathing room. But, at the end of the day, your defense also gave nothing up, 3 points on this day, and it comes by way of a short field that the offense put them in that predicament, and that's hard to bury them on in that particular thing. So, your defense definitely didn't give up any ground on that. Offense, of course, was a little bit of a different story, I think. But, bottom line is that you feel great about the win, and they did handle that business. But I was less comfortable, I would say. I was a little bit more of I'm not sure. Well, hopefully they can keep in here. And, you did see across the league, and it happened across our NFC West games here in this this past weekend, Brendan, where the Niners did the same thing we did, where they get up on them and they're up comfortably and they look like they got the game firmly in control, and then just suddenly it slips out of your grasp at the end. And the same Lions team that we're playing this week had the same kind of game against the Cardinals, where you got up ahead of them and you had the game in your grasp, and it just kind of slipped out of your grasp there at the end. And so, that's the part I was worried about with it. But bottom line is that you had this game in control from start to finish, really, and it wasn't really in a place of threatening at any point in time.
Yeah. What after the second quarter started, I wasn't really concerned about really much of anything in that game. There was an opportunity in this game. It would have been a great time to maybe see a little bit of Sam Howell, maybe a little bit of Christian Haynes, maybe a little Mike Morris. There was that opportunity to, by the fourth quarter, be in a position where you could maybe sub in some of the backups and get a look at them. Didn't happen because, the middle part of this game got very sloppy, and it got sloppy on both sides. Don't get me wrong. The Dolphins were every bit as sloppy pre-snap as the Seahawks were post-snap. But I did say before this season started that it was likely the Seahawks would be a heavily penalized team because they were implementing a new defense and a new offense, and there would come some growing pains with that I thought would manifest in the form of penalties. But that one got a little bit ridiculous, and I guess we should just consider ourselves fortunate that we had that happen in a game against a team that couldn't really fight back.
Yeah, I mean, the penalties are one of the myriad of things that we want McDonald to clean up, right? This has been a penalized team going for many years back, and Rome's not going to be built in a day on that side of the stuff. So there's probably going to be a bit of a process to get that fully kind of cleaned up. I thought the officials called it pretty tight as well. I think even watching tonight's game on Monday night, you're seeing the same thing where it feels like a little bit across the league, the penalties are being called at times in that sort of ticky-tack place of things. Not that there weren't legitimate penalties in there as well, but officials are calling it a little tight in addition to that. And it's both ways, both for us and the opponent. But I think when you do have young players, your point about that is you're going to get some sloppy play at times, and you're just going to have to kind of live with that with the growing pains.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be one or two other games like that this year where the team just can't get out of their own way. A lot of the holding penalties, and they're obvious holding penalties. That's the thing. Like Anthony Bradford's practically pulling the guy's jersey off. Connor Williams is like taking the guy down by his shoulder pads, stuff like that. So definitely part of the process, I think, of implementing new systems on both sides of the ball. But some of that stuff is also just like effort, execution, and concentration. So I'm hoping it gets better. I will say that I don't think the NFL is terribly happy about a game like that because I think that if you included the declined penalties and the penalties that got picked up, you might be looking at like 35 times a flag was thrown in that game or something. I really think it might be that bad. So that's not good. That's not the product you want.
No, that's where I come back to. I mean, it certainly is. There's some legitimate calls to be had out there. This is the issue of when there is legitimate calls and then you're ticky-tacking it up around the legitimate calls, it becomes a flag fest. And, it's an ongoing issue in the NFL. I think it's a league-wide problem. Officiating, how to fix it. You're creating new rules and new ways for them to flag every single year. And you're eventually going to be led to having games where you turn into just flag fests very often. And, it's subjective and it's arbitrary, and week by week it changes by officiating crew, and it's a part of the sport that frustrates me. But it's also a place that's not going anywhere anytime soon, and I can't just chalk up completely the penalty situation then at that point solely on the back of us being undisciplined or poor in that manner. It's more back to, it's some of that, but it's also some of the fact the officials are calling everything that's on the line, and Miami's being subjected to it just as well.
Yeah, especially the pre-snap stuff. And for obvious reasons, the NFL's cracking down on pre-snap and formation stuff this season, which I don't have a problem with, but it does make the product a little bit frustrating to watch right now. And until these players learn, they really got to make sure they line up correctly. It's not going away.
Yeah, I mean, there's people asking me questions about how this gets fixed, and there's a variety of ways NFL can take steps to improving this. Full-time officiating crews, taking out some of the subjective calls that are in the rule book, where officiating crew by officiating crew, holding to the higher standard. There's nothing's going to be the preeminent thing that's going to clean everything up in one fell swoop with one fix here, but there's some things they can do to at least improve it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would just say get used to it for now. Understand that it's raining on everybody. It's not just raining on us. And at the same time, I think that was just kind of an extreme example here. And that doesn't happen in every game, obviously. You're not going to see every game with like 30 flags hitting the floor. So hopefully gets a little bit better next time around. But I guess another thing from that game that you could talk about would be the fact that very early on in this game, you lose both of your top two defensive linemen. Byron Murphy gets taken out very early. Leonard Williams gets taken out very early. And I was wondering if maybe that would be Miami's opportunity to just run for like 250 yards on us. Didn't happen. So you got to say a lot of the issues that we had last week got cleaned up a bit in this game. And I've said it before, I don't care who Miami has a quarterback. That is a very dangerous rushing attack they can throw at you. And there really wasn't that much that affected us in this game.
No, the run game was improved. I think the guys you had to fill in, Jaron Reed and Hankins, for your losses up there, who had to carry more of the snaps. I think Hankins in particular was kind of an underrated guy for you in this game, and how he helped carry the day, because that could have been their into getting a win here. Is just your inability to stop the run, because you don't have the depth to call upon, losing your basically starting two defensive tackles. But they held the line in there. They didn't allow Miami to make that the way that they were going to beat them. I think it's going to provide a bigger challenge going forward this week against Detroit in this manner. But very impressive to watch those backups go on there. And it just shows you with this defensive line depth, not only has Schneider built a defensive line that's very strong from the upper end portion of the talent and the defensive tackle position, especially, as well as the edges, but that he's also here reinforced it with quality depth. Jaron Reed, who some people were talking about as a cut candidate, I always thought that was a silly thing to be raised out there by some, because he's a quality defensive tackle, and you saw and felt that in this game. Hankins brought in to be that nose tackle backup that you can rely upon if you need to call upon him with some of the front lines guys out, and you're not looking to have him start every game, but if you start him, have him go out there and play starter snaps for 3-4 games over the course of the year to fill in like that in this 17-game season. That provides tremendous value to the team. And you felt that in this game, where he was immovable out of that nose tackle role. He was even on a couple of plays taking the right step post snap to where the running game was going and clogging up the initial hole and allowing those guys to run free behind him with your linebackers. So just loved what we saw from that, and it just makes you feel great about the depth you have there.
Yeah, Hankins was our highest rated defender on PFF this week, I think.
He was. He absolutely was. And the tape backed this up, where you just had him at times stepping. It'd just be a mere 2 steps to the direction of a run, right? But it's 360 pounds stepping quickly to a spot. And a lot of the Miami game is going to be hitting reach blocks or having their linemen hit you in that block a little bit down the road, let's say, right? They're not going to straight up just go at you, but it's going to be a lot of hitting you lateral. So when you have a defensive lineman like that, take those steps, anticipating kind of that vet, I've seen it all, I know where this play is going. Those linemen might get to the spot on time, but he's not in the place he's supposed to be, because he's anticipating where the play is going with some of the intelligence he can bring to play with that. And that's what I think got in this game. And I thank God for it, because if not for Hankins, this might, actually turn into somewhat of a close game where you're struggling a little bit to stop that run.
Right. So, I mean, offensively, I think we got to talk about that one a little bit, because that was probably the side of the ball that left a little bit to be desired in this one. They dropped the early 17 points, right? They dropped 17 points in that first quarter. Everything's going great. I thought the offense looked great on that drive. Noah Fant looked fast again. It looks like he's coming back from that toe injury in full finally. I thought he made some nice catches early on. You got the big play to Metcalf. Got a couple of things going to Charbonnet, who actually, maybe for the first time in his career, got off to a strong start in a game. Usually he gets off to a slow start and then picks up momentum as the game goes on. This was maybe the first game I've seen from Charbonnet where he got off to a good start. And then it just seemed like they couldn't get out of their own way to actually make that game the blowout that it easily could have been. So, I mean, what do we worry about on that side of the ball? What are you trying to take away from that?
I think Grubb's still finding his footing at the pro level, and it's going to be a process probably, because he is going from college to pros. He's never been here before as an OC. We talked about this offseason. There's not been an OC at the college level who's gone from OC college to OC pro. It's not something that's the leap that is you tend to see made. And so there's a reason for this. A reason is probably there's a bit of this transitionary process where the guy's got to kind of figure out what does and what doesn't work anymore. Grubb I think he had a press conference today, spoke just about those wide hash marks and some of the differences on that. I mean, it's even effective, Brendan, in the screen game. Screen game college-wise, as an offensive lineman, you can take that like 3 yards upfield in the screen game. It makes it more effective. Well, I can only take 1 step upfield, 1 yard upfield in the pros. I go past that and I'm downfield blocking. I'm gonna have a penalty called for that. So there, I think a bit of that's going on when I watch Grubb, because you can feel him get in rhythm and then get out of rhythm and then just sort of searching for the right deal at that point. I don't think they got conservative, for instance. I just think that he couldn't find kind of the right stuff. I think he gets, to me, a little bit frustrating at times, where he'll do some smart stuff and then do some stuff that's kind of almost not, I'm not gonna say stupid, but just you question a little bit of like, what were you thinking there? And that's the part that gets frustrating. I love that they did go back to the middle of the field. You mentioned Fant, and it felt like whenever Geno felt like he was getting pressure, he could trust on going back to the point of hitting Fant in the middle of the field and finding him as a security blanket. And it was kind of his go-to throughout the course of this game. I liked there was more, I felt like, of an onus in this game on targeting the middle of the field. But I just think it's a rhythm out of rhythm thing, like a jump shooter in basketball. And sometimes Grubb right now early on shows you when he's in rhythm, they can be very explosive. And when he's out of rhythm, it can be a little bit rough. But he found it back at that final drive at the end. And that was a really well-conducted drive. Obviously, Charbonnet really locked it in at that point. And Grubb as well with the play calling was solid there. So you were able to at least finish it off on that side of it. But you would like to see some more consistency from the offense. It would help if the pass protection wasn't league worst and if the run blocking could get a little more consistent at times.
Right. That's something that I try to talk about too. I know Grubb hasn't been perfect so far. I know that there are problems, but I think people need to understand how hard it is to do anything when your offensive line is playing like that. And honestly, it's not just the pass protection. The run blocking has not been all that good either. It's been better, but there's some real issues with the run blocking as well. So like what you're seeing right now with the Bears, where everybody's taking shots at Shane Waldron, and I get it. He's not been off to a good start so far. Everybody's talking about Shane Waldron, but it's the same thing. It is really hard to make anything happen when your pass protection is that poor.
It's sinks many offenses, and look no further than, if you have PFF, look at I went back 5 years on this and did a deep dive on it. It's just as much true this year. If you have pass protection that's like 27th and behind, 27 to 32, hell, even 25 to 32, you're probably going to have a bad offense. You're probably going to have a quarterback that's under a lot of duress and not making great decisions inside of that. Because if you put a quarterback under consistent pressure, eventually they will break. It's like people under torture, Brendan. Everyone breaks. It doesn't matter how tough you are. You give the toughest fighter out there with the strongest of chins. He takes too many shots in that chin. Eventually you can ring that bell easier and easier. It all kind of, to me, flows downward on that. And I look at that in the same way with the pressure. And it's part of why I have so elevated Geno as much as I have in talking about him, is because he's dealing with that. And yet he is still performing great and doing what he can. And a lot of ways at times carrying us in certain games. And it's all the reason why it's worth noting, because it's so few quarterbacks that can pull that off.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think I did these calculations earlier this week where I removed special teams and defensive touchdowns from Geno's, from everybody's point total. And I think the Seahawks are 6th in the league in points if you do that. So just offensive scoring, they are 6th. And I want you to think about that, because we have no offensive line. We have one of the 3 worst offensive lines in football. And our lead running back has missed about 70% of the season. That's not supposed to happen, guys. That's really supposed to be impossible. That's something that should never come up in a simulation, even if you run it 10,000 times. And here we are pulling it off.
It really is. And it also speaks to where you're in the future, if you can get this stuff even mildly cleaned up, where that takes the potential of your offense going forward, and how it's got so much more room as far as the ceiling here to get even more.
Mm-hmm. Right. So on the offensive line a little bit, because that's obviously going to have to be the subject of most of our conversations about what needs to get better, because the conversation really starts and ends with that. There's not a heck of a lot else that you need to be thinking about with this offense. I want to ask you about Anthony Bradford. He did show up on the injury report today, did not practice. Where are you with Anthony Bradford? He stands out as the weak link on this offensive line. Are you going to be patient with this, or are you going to chuck Christian Haynes out there and see if you can get something a little bit better?
I would be patient with it for the moment, in my opinion. I think a part of what you have to look at with Bradford is also what you're doing with him from a long-term plan standpoint here. It isn't just about his performance in the moment. It's about the development him in the long term and the trust in that development that the upside will be making it worth it. And that's maybe a little bit where this discussion, in my opinion, should really be turning, because I think a lot of people are getting to become victims of the moment in this. You know, Haynes can't be worse. How can it be any worse? Let's just get this thing, get it out there, do this. And there's a sense of urgency, which I can appreciate from some folks in wanting to see Haynes out there. But I would much rather have my franchise taking a long-term view of things. And I think long-term view of this, ideally from the Seahawks standpoint, would be to see Bradford take the job and take the bull by the horns at the right guard and eventually transition Haynes into the left guard standpoint of things. That's my opinion on it. Now, whether I'm right or wrong on that one, we'll find out in time. But when it comes down to whether or not the coaching staff is playing, and I don't know why there's this sort of pull from the fan base a little bit and general fandom in general on this one. This is one that I'm finding more frustrating from my standpoint, because I just don't get it. There seems to be a perception and view out there from fans, Brendan, that somehow the coaching staff has a better player on the bench, but they're just not playing him because of reasons. I do think Bradford's long-term is a part of why they keep rolling him out there, but that also doesn't mean it's mutually inexclusive to the fact that Haynes would be better by putting him out there. And so that's the part that I find almost kind of a bit, I'm going to say silly in this discussion a little bit, quite frankly, is that you have to think that Haynes is the better option. Then you have to also believe then that the coaching staff is essentially shooting themselves in the foot. And I don't understand why that's a belief out there in the fan base. I understand he's a third round pick, and I understand that because of that, it's a pedigree and people want to see the pedigree guy put in there. But are we really not trusting a coaching staff who's already shown you in their ability to get this team out there and ready to play and have the guys out there they do have playing as well as they are, that they're not putting the best guy out there? Are we really believing that that's the case?
Yeah, I would say that does occasionally happen. It usually happens when you have a veteran versus a young player, and the coaching staff wants to put the veteran out there because they feel comfortable with the veteran. And they don't go to the rookie because they're like, oh, I don't trust him yet, even though he's clearly a better player. Sometimes you might see that. There was actually a comment from, I think it was Grubb in his media availability today, where he said that Haynes is having some issues with his technique and his strength.
Power.
Yeah, his power. So I guess that comment at least should let you know that they're aware of the issue and they're working on correcting it. And they're aware of the fact that Bradford has not lived up to expectations yet. Because the thing with Bradford is every week we hear how good he looked in practice. Oh, he had a great practice this week. He was great in training camp. He had a great preseason. So it does start to get a little bit frustrating when you know that Bradford is getting the job, probably because he looks much, much better in practice. But I mean,
let's unpack this just a little bit. I'm with you on that. Occasionally you can find situations where maybe a coach is playing a veteran over a rookie. I would offer to you that the coach very well may be right on that. I think it's very rare where a coach is playing a player that's a vet who's not as good as the guy that he could be playing in there because he's worried about insert A. It does happen, but I think it happens very infrequently. These coaches' jobs are on the line, and with as many coaches as getting flexed through, you don't have the comfortability to be able to put a guy out there that's not going to have your team performing at their best. I think, too, some of this, again, comes back to the silly state of this, is that we did what people wanted in the Patriot game. You gave Haynes a run out there, and he was god-awful in pass protection. He almost got Geno killed. We had a 60-yard touchdown pass wide open to DK that Geno saw. I've looked at it on all 22 15 times. The play is blown by Haynes' bad block. He loses the block instantaneously off the snap. And let's unpack a little bit of the Grubb power element of this. When you went back and watched Haynes on his tape as a right guard, what you saw a lot of the time was a guy that struggled with power from the right guard position, which is unusual because at the right guard position, you need the power. That's the first thing they got to have. You don't need the dancing bear. The dancing bear needs to be at the left guard position. The right guard position, you need the power. And if you watch him a lot of times in the running game, it's a lot of him catching and flowing people through. So he'll catch a defensive tackle, and then he'll just try to route him through the backfield. So you're getting penetration, and then he's routing. Penetration, and then routing. You can't do that at the NFL level, right? You've got to at least get basically, we both kind of got neither a win or neither a loss, but you certainly can't just allow penetration and to guide him through. NFL players are too good in that element. So it's a bit of thing that makes sense to me when Grubb says he needs to work on his power and strength. That adds up to me, because when you watched his college tape, that's something that you didn't get. But again, we come back to the theory by some fans on this going, well, no, he's definitely better on this. Well, then the coaching staff must be seeing it wrong, and I must be seeing it right on this. And that's the part on this one, which you can sell me on that. And you can tell me that there's times it does happen in NFL history, but you got to give me something that shows this current coaching staff has shown you that they're not willing to trot out the best player at any given position, as that seems like that's at least it's early on, but that's at least something that they've shown early on, in my opinion, a willingness to do.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to look at it. And regardless of anything else, I want to say I'm still optimistic about Bradford long-term, because he is very talented. And the thing with Bradford is he barely played in college. He had like 17 starts at LSU. So I do think big picture, no matter what, I would like to see patience with Bradford. I would like some understanding that this is probably not going to take off until year 3, year 4, really, because he is so far behind the 8 ball. Most of these offensive linemen, they come out, they played 50 plus games. They've started like 4 straight seasons at college. Bradford didn't have that. Bradford is he's like the Anthony Richardson of right guards, right?
Absolutely. I think it's another great point onto this, and one that I lean onto as well. Every player's got to be different in the way and the circumstance you look at him. If he's a 27, 28-year-old kid and he's having these problems, that's one thing. When he's missing those college starts, like you say, and he played last year, and let's face it, he didn't start all 16 games last year, right? He got a couple of starts intermixed in there. This is his first opportunity to be the de facto starter, to go week in and week out. And so there's got to be a bit of a learning process here. And I feel like we as fans at times get very impatient, and our toes start tapping, and we go, I want this now. And we've got to allow for the development angle of this to build in, because if you can build a bit of patience in here, you might get down the road here to having a really good player, and then you're able to move Haynes into that left guard. And then that offensive line, for this early bit of pain you go through, is the better for it, is overall stronger for it. And that's what I believe the coaching staff is thinking here. And they're giving you kind of all the indications of this, is why I support it on this. You want to make the offensive line a strength. It's not just throw this guy in, throw that guy in. It's building the chemistry, building the cohesion, developing the young players. And it all goes together, in my opinion.
Right. I will admit, I've been pretty frustrated with Bradford because he's looked unthinkably bad so far. Like in this last game, like the one thing you could say about Bradford in the first 2 games, he was doing a lot of stupid stuff. He wasn't allowing that much pressure. In this game, according to PFF, he allowed, I think, 6 pressures. Okay? He's a right guard. You're going up against nose tackles and 1-techs. You shouldn't be giving up pressure like that. So I understand the outcry. And if Christian Haynes gets more of an extended look in this, in an upcoming game, I'm not going to be upset about it. But I have advocated for patience long-term with Bradford, and an understanding that we're definitely talking about a very talented but very raw player.
There's at least 2 or 3 times in this last game, including the sack that was given up by Bradford in this game early on. Because if you talk about a 1-tech, Brendan, when you're in pass protection, Brendan, who typically gets the center help between the 2 guards in pass protection? The left guard or the right guard?
Well, I mean, you would think it's the left guard, because the left guard's dealing with the athletic 3-tech, right?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say that the wrong way?
You said the wrong way. It's historically, traditionally, right-handed offenses that are going to go towards the right side of the football field, and most of their throws are going to lean the center help to the right guard.
My bad. I said it the wrong way. Yeah.
It's the opposite way of that. So why I bring this up is there's a couple all 22 shots you can get from this film of this game, including the sack that Bradford directly gave up that has people pissed and mad, is that's a play where you're taking Connor Williams and you're bringing him over to the 3-tech. Why are you bringing him over the 3-tech? Because you can't trust Laken Tomlinson in pass protection. Why Laken Tomlinson's out there for what he does as a run blocker, right? But then we come back to the baseline of why this play fails, the baseline of why this sack occurs is traditionally I'd be giving that help to Bradford. You knew pass protection was going to be ass on him when it was coming out. You knew he was going to be a guy that was going to need the natural flow of that center over to help him out. And you're not doing that because you're rolling out Lakin and you're protecting Lakin. But that then has to be kind of built into this a little bit, where it's like, okay, now we're also exposing him out a little bit. And you've got a guy like Calais Campbell on that inside around in there he's dealing with, or Seiler in there, that are, competent defensive tackles for the Miami Dolphins. And it's a little bit of an outcrop of that as well. So it ain't just as simple as, he's just bad. It's also how you're having to run your protection schemes and who you're trying to protect. And I'm not saying he's good in pass protection. I'm not, but I'm also saying he ain't getting that help there. And I'm seeing that on some of the all 22 shots. You're also putting him in a bit of a tough position too versus some of the other right guards in this league.
Right. So one other note on the offensive line that I do want to talk about on the more positive side, was that the best game Stone Forsythe has played in his NFL career?
I don't know. I'm higher on Stone than other people on this, Brendan. He's the guy battered around for years, and I've been a guy saying for years that I think that he gives you very competent plays. He's had some of the games that I think that are very close to this kind of game. It might be the best, but it's also not the first time he's been down this road. And I think he is a guy that deserves a lot of respect from the fan base, because in many ways he's keeping this thing held together, where it could have completely fallen apart on a right tackle position being a catastrophe at this point.
Yeah, I thought he was great in this game. I thought he might have been our best offensive lineman. And, I mean, that's saying something, because I know Cross gave up the sack, but Cross did not play a bad game either. And Forsythe, people got to remember, this is a third string. I would say that every team in the league, if they get down to their third string right tackle, they're kind of expecting that guy to get blown off the field. And you can't say that about Forsythe in this game at all. He really competed in there. And I was really proud of him. I was really happy about what Stone gave us in this one.
He's earned himself some money, Brendan. He's going to go out this next offseason and probably be given a contract that's, I'm not saying being paid high market, but he'll get probably a mid-tier deal as a tackle in this league, whether to be a starter or is just to be their main, rotational guy coming through. Because as I said, he's played good football the past couple of years, and somebody's going to recognize that. Competent tackle play is hard to come by. And it being that I don't think he's going to be costing a lot, but it'll work good for the Hawks on that measure of it, because you can, of course, then potentially play some compensatory games here with him down the road too, if he does go and get that. I'm talking, like a 3-year, $18 million deal or something, kind of into that mid-tier spot.
Yeah, I could see that. I think people will be surprised at what he gets. It's kind of like, it's like a better version of Jake Curhan, right? Because Jake Curhan did not get minimum money this offseason. He got a little more than that. And I think some people were really surprised, but these players, I think, are a little bit better than some people give them credit for. But that's especially true with Forsythe. I'd also argue, although some people would argue against this now, he's playing out of position. Like, he's a left tackle, and he's playing on the right side. It doesn't really fit his skill set, but he's grinding out there. Some people kind of feel like he's a better right tackle than left tackle. I don't agree with that. I think that if you gave him an extended period of time at left tackle, he would probably settle in better.
Yeah, I don't think he's a people mover off the right side, and dealing with power edges doesn't fit him well normally. I know NFL has moved a little bit off this, but it still fits this way, where you're going to have a tendency to get the power edge on that side. So power edge is going to go against the thing he doesn't do necessarily well, which is deal with power. He can kind of move and dance with anybody out there, which is what you want on the blind side. And that is his natural position coming out of Florida. It is his natural spot. He's grown his game into being a decent right tackle.
Right. So I think that's about all we can say about the Dolphins game. It was a good game. Could have been better. Could have been some chances to sub in some backups in that fourth quarter if we had been a little sharper. But I am not unhappy with any 3-touchdown win in the current NFL, where almost every game feels like it's close.
No, it's any given Sunday, man. Anything can happen. So, you don't just keep stacking the dubs up, take it week by week, and get yourself some breathing room. And, we said the Seahawks could make some hay with this early schedule early on. There's some room here to get something going, and they're doing that. They're taking care of business. So,
yep. They look like the team that'll capitalize on the Niners having the season from hell here, because they I don't want to say they're out, because I know they're probably going to make some big deadline trade to try to get back in it, because they're all in anyway. But it is looking like the year from hell over in San Fran already.
Yeah, they're. Rams aren't too far off of their situation where they're at either. And Seahawks have a chance here to take advantage in this situation, I think, in a major way. When you look at the landscape of the NFC West this year being maybe weaker than it's been in recent years, and they played a lot of games, and they have a team that's growing older and older here. These last few years, as this window's been so long of the Niners, the Super Bowl window. And they're very top heavy. Rams are this way. That's why they're both in the same predicament, Brendan. It's not about that they built these teams necessarily tall and deep. You built them tall. I don't know if you built them with as much depth, and that's not as much the fault of these two teams, by the way. I mean, in the Rams case, they're just turning this thing around. They just dumped all that dead money last year, and yes, Stafford's still playing great, but they're in many ways with Donald retiring, kind of moving it around. But in the 49ers case, you're absolutely, I think, feeling a little bit of that, fatigue in there. We talked about the two guys that were holding out throughout training camp, and said, look, Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk, you can't just miss a whole training camp, walk in there at the very first game of the year, and you're just going to hit the ground running like you haven't missed anything. And they talked about in the telecast with Trent mentioning this very thing last week during the Rams 49er telecast, that he was going through that. And then you stack up all the injuries on top of it, Brendan. There's a play in this game last week where Devondre Campbell gets beat down the sideline on a play where if it's Dre Greenlaw, it's a wheel route to the running back. Devondre can't run that. Dre could. That's a play where you're feeling that loss of those injuries out there. And it's not just there. They lost Javon Hargrave this past week as well. And we look at that defensive tackle position. They went from having DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead in there, which were two monsters, to now rotating through from Javon Kinlaw, and then Hargrave coming through, and then they're trying to get Malik Collins to roll inside there. And they may be pretty decent on the edges here, but they got some holes on the inside. And Brendan, I don't know, they may make a move like you're saying. Maybe they come together on the health front of it, but they're in a predicament because Purdy's playing really good. It's really good from the Hawks fan standpoint because we want Purdy to play really good, but have all the injuries. So then they got to get the next offseason and they have to pay Purdy. And from our perspective, that's just how this is playing out right now. And so it's very wonderful on that standpoint of it. But I don't think that they're done yet, to your point. I think that there's still another at least final push here where they can maybe try to make the fire ignite. And like you said, they maybe can't make a deal. They are sitting on a lot of cap space, Brendan. But then again, they need to roll all of that really over into next year's cap. It's really not pure cap space. They need to roll that stuff over.
Yeah, I just feel like if they think it'll make a difference, they'll do it because they'll be like, well, we're already all the way in anyway. Like, this is the last chance to win the Super Bowl. Like, after this year, it's going to be really, really hard to hold this together. So we got to try. And I'm not saying that would be smart, but I'm saying I think they'll do it because I think Lynch is going to get fired after this year if they don't do it. So he'll be like, what do I care if I give up future assets?
Well, the rumors are that they've already stretched the dollar of the owner as far as he was already well beyond being comfortable taking. And if that's the case, then he would probably veto that. But to your point on this, hard to see how you're going to have the window extend again next year. Is McCaffrey supposed to be coming back, healthier there, another year older? You're probably going to have to cut one of Debo or Kittle, I would imagine, if not both of them. You're already riding into the voidable year period. So, you might be right on that. It's hard to predict what they're going to do in this scenario, but they are battered and wounded. And, there's a real chance here with it that, Hawks have a chance with both the Rams and Niners if they can stay clicked in and locked in and keep this rolling to really give them some breathing space, which is so helpful in the NFL season if you're going to make a run. I've always said, Brendan, you got to have the feast factor. You remember this when I've talked about this, where most teams that go and win the Super Bowl have a feast factor within their own division. You want to think of it like iron sharpens iron, and we're going to go through a battlefield every week, and that'll just toughen us up extra. But it doesn't always work that way. You end up, more beating yourself up. So you get a feast factor on your division with a couple teams you're able to kind of eat on. You get a little bit of that division, that little bit of that lead. You can manage your injuries then better, right? You start out 8-0, now at 9-0. Now you can be very conservative with your injury situation and kind of massage it a little bit. Not saying we're going to go do that, Brendan, but I'm just saying if you can get along those lines, in my opinion, it makes it very helpful in getting through this long, arduous season which is sometimes just about outlasting everybody on that health front.
Yeah, I think that's a no-brainer. You'd always rather be in a weak division than a strong division. I think that's an easy one, honestly.
Some fans say it with they do the beating on their. I get in my chest sometimes. We're like, no, I want the best of the best. I want to prove myself. I'm like, if you might come out with the win, but you've lost an ear and a tooth got knocked out, and maybe not the best.
Okay, let's see here. Blitz 2K5. Thank you for the member message. This is on the Hawks Nest side, member for 28 months over there. After 3 weeks, what's your Hawks record prediction, and who are you most surprised by?
Didn't we both have 3-0?
Well, individually, yes. As we've gone through the games, yes. Now, I would have said we would have lost to Miami if they had, Tua, but
I
obviously when
thought
we
you had
got
us at I thought you had 3-0 in the offseason, though, in your prediction. I thought you had
no, I had a lot of respect for the September Dolphins, man. I had a
Oh,
lot of
okay.
respect for those September Dolphins, and the September Dolphins were a one-hit wonder, I guess.
It's you're hearing about a little bit of a laissez-faire thing coming in now there, Brendan, beyond the injury thing, which I think is that's the part that has people going, "Oh, okay, maybe this is twisting in this fashion." If you know what I mean on this. It's
Yeah, McDaniel's looking a little strung out. He's not the Mike McDaniel that I know.
it's just you yeah, and I like the guy a lot. I think he's very smart, but you get him in press conferences sometimes talking, and you're like, is that really going to connect with the players? We're just gonna do what we're gonna do. Yeah. I mean, just try to get the win. And you go, boy, I don't know. Does that click? Is that I think that's going to be a little light. And you're hearing about some of the practices from there, and some of the stuff you're hearing kind of like leak out now. It only leaks out when you lose, of course, but he's won 11 games 2 years in a row, so he has been legitimate. He earned the right for you to have that prediction down there.
Excuse me. Right. So, my record prediction hasn't really changed. I still think this is like a 10 or 11 win team. I'm gonna say 11 now because the Rams look like they're going to be pretty out of it, and also, honestly, with what's going on with the Niners, I think you should be able to get to 11. But I'm not going to go beyond that yet. They haven't shown me they're going to be some juggernaut yet.
11 was what I had at the start of the year, and I'm feeling good on my prediction, Brendan. I mean, you mentioned those teams. You got three wins out the gate. If I think you can sweep the Cardinals. I think you can at least split between the Niners and the Rams at this point. I think that's relatively okay to be in the ballpark of saying that, especially the Rams in a couple of weeks who will still come in, I think, minus their top two receivers in that game. So, I mean, what is that right there? That's another 4 wins on top of the 3 there you're on. So you're at 7 wins right there. You just got to pull 4 more wins out off the remaining schedule. And you got teams like the Giants still sitting there on your schedule. And so I think you do get to 11. I do. And then who are we most surprised by? Does that mean which team are we most surprised by?
I would think it's a player on the Seahawks, but I guess it could go either way.
Yeah. A player most surprised by. Boy, I don't even know if I have somebody I'm really surprised. I knew Dodson would play pretty good if he played, so it's not been shocking there. I mean, maybe Jenkins is a top 10 rated PFF safety right now, and as well as he's played, good tackler that he's been, good all around player.
That's a good one.
He might be the one that's maybe surprised me the most because you did think Witherspoon and Bowen were going to take well to this. You did think the defensive lineman would come forward. You thought Derek Hall would get at least a little bit of a step forward. I mean, it's been a big step forward, but and then offensively, those guys that are going are who we thought would be going. So yeah, I'll go with Rashawn.
Yeah, I think that's a decent one. Maybe Derek Hall, but I'm not that surprised by what I'm seeing from Derek Hall personally. I was still high on him after last year. I know some people jumped off the boat. I didn't jump off the boat.
I think too, it's a place, Brendan, when we go through and do this, it's always about learning lessons within this too, and learning things that we start to think we know and understand about the scouting process, especially because I think when we scout, it should always be our goal in this to try to improve it every year and how we outlook these players and learn lessons off the prior, right? And the strong lesson that we've learned in recent years is that if you have a second round edge rusher, you got a guy picked at the end of the first round or in that area, that give the guy through the first year. Because we've seen in Mafe and Hall, especially, that those guys come really usually forward in that year too in a major way. And maybe Darrell Taylor was the only guy that really didn't for Schneider during his time of picking guys in that area. But Frank Clark's and those kind of guys have been pretty good picks in there. And maybe not with the back end of the first round, Brendan. That's the bad spot, right? But at least second round edges seem to be pretty good for John. And you got to give him that extra year. Got to basically give him the 1 year mulligan.
Right. Absolutely. Dorian Scarlett. I think this is on the Hawks Nest side. Thank you for the $1.99. No message.
Thank you, Dorian.
Yeah, thank you, Dorian.
Appreciate the dono. Sorry, guys, we're not on the deal. Just StreamYard having some technical difficulties tonight. So it's not even me or Brennan. It's StreamYard having the problems tonight.
Yeah. Not sure what to say about it, but hopefully it'll be better next time.
Amen.
All right. Let's see here. Coda Dad, thank you for the $13.99 Canadian. Given our injuries and poor O-line, I think the Lions are going to run all over us. Might be an ugly game. Right. So we got to turn our focus a little bit to this Lions game now. That's obviously going to be the focus of the rest of this stream. And do you remember that week 1 Lions game where they played the Rams and they went to overtime, the Sunday night game?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Lions get the ball in overtime, and they just decided to run the ball right up A gap and B gap the whole drive, and the Rams couldn't do anything to stop it. If the Seahawks go into this game with no Big Cat and no Byron Murphy and no Jerome Baker, they might just do that the whole game, and I don't know what we're going to be able to do to stop it. So this is going to be a difficult one with the diminishing product we have up in that front seven. I will admit that there is a possibility that Detroit just dominates this game on the ground and wins that way.
It's hard too because Detroit's at a point of emphasis on the run right now. You know, teams go through their ebbs and flows on passing and running and being committed to one versus being committed to the other. And Detroit had 2 weeks ago Goff throwing 53 attempts over the course of the game against Tampa Bay, and it did not look good. And it got a poor result. They lost a game at home to Tampa Bay on that same thing. They came back last week against Arizona and they said, we can move this line of scrimmage. We can, if we stay committed to it, we don't have to get fancy in the passing game at all. And quite frankly, Goff had some ugly moments for as few passes as he had in that game. It's another thing to unpack here on this matchup. But when it comes to the running game, they more than 2-to-1 their run to pass against the Cardinals last week. And they just came downhill with it. It wasn't a lot of outside run. It was a lot of, we're going to hit you in the A and the B gaps. We're going to mono you and blow you off the ball. Not having Frank Ragnow is a big thing. Ragnow is a big part on this where you got the bat. You now have a guard because it's kind of a 2-for-1. I think their guard moves to center. So now, you're both changing the center position and a guard position for that Lions team. But their commitment to the running game, their ability, Brendan, to be physical on both sides of the ball is not to be understated. I know the whole kneecap thing is something that we laugh about, but it's also indicative of the type of philosophy that Campbell's instilled there and how unique that philosophy is versus many teams in the NFL, one being like, that Miami team that we just played that was probably on the other end of that stylistic, what do you want to call it? Stylistic end of the scale, I guess, so to speak, where they're not that. So I'm worried about it too. It's the thing where if we lose this game, it's going to be because of the same thing where they were able to 2v1 us on the run to pass rate and they were able to get after our defensive line. And it's going to challenge those old graybeards, Brendan, to hold up. Jaron and Hadkins are going to have to play probably 40 snaps in this game. Mm-hmm. And we're going to need them to turn in another performance like they did last week because, Lions are, I really believe they'll be committed to it.
Right. For whatever it's worth, I feel like Big Cat will play. Murphy, I think, is a lost cause. He's not playing.
Makes sense on that. I mean, the ribs thing is a tolerance thing, right? So maybe gets a Toradol shot, maybe just toughs it out. I think Bosa is going through something similar with the rib with the Niners right now.
Oh, really?
And then, yeah, I think he's got something dodgy with him as well. And those hamstrings, don't want to mess with those. So,
right. It just annoys me, right? Because Murphy never got hurt in college. He had a very clean medical record coming out of college, and then he gets to the pros, and immediately there's a thing. It makes me think of Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny had the cleanest medicals ever in college. Gets to the NFL and immediately turns into glass. I'm like, can we just have our first round pick, please?
I will say to this point, Brendan, though, too, as well. I don't know if I'm really a big, happy enjoyer of watching Byron Murphy playing one tech and nose tackle. I understand that he can do it, and I understand he can do it well, but I think I like more of him in a 3-tech role where he's more going to be aligned with a one-on-one kind of block that he can go out and exploit, or that you force offenses to pull the double team to him in the 3-tech side of it. I know you want to get Leonard and him on the field at the same time, and you don't want Leonard playing the nose, but like I felt like this was Texas last year too with him, where I felt like Texas played too much of him at the nose as well. You've got Tavondre Sweat. What are we doing? It's like, but he can do it. It's like, yeah, let him get after it, because the nose tackle guy, what is he doing? He ain't penetrating. He ain't getting into the backfield. He's holding the ground at the point of attack. And I'm glad that he can do that, but that's not really why you drafted the guy. And he got injured on a play where he's getting double teamed at the point of attack as a nose tackle. I mean, that's more to me if you want to talk about avoiding injury on it and place that you can get ahead of that a little bit, Brendan. I think exhibit A to me on that part.
Yeah. I think there's some validity there. I think that they just don't want to give Hankins too many snaps. I think they're trying to avoid giving Hankins that number of snaps because he's the true nose tackle on the team, right?
Yeah, and they're trying to get their best two guys out on the field at one time, and I get that whole thing. I do get it, but at the same point in time, it's also like, let's limit those snaps down, rather than it being like at the forefront of what you're having Murphy do on these snaps. And quite frankly, in a lot of the 22 snaps going back to preseason, it's nose tackle, nose tackle, nose tackle, nose tackle, nose tackle. And I see you're kind of setting this up when you dive up the number of snaps you have him in alignment of that, then that's that many times he's having to take on those double teams. And he can do it again. I get that he can do it, but he's built to be a 3-tech. He's not a monstrous size 3-tech. He ain't like Leonard Williams, where he's like a big 3-tech. He's kind of a little bit of a slightly undersized 3-tech if you really want to get down to the bottom line on it. So slopping him out there to the nose and taking on double teams like that, he got Jean-Claude Van Damme on a double team that was coming in late. And, I would like to try to avoid that if we can try to drive situations away from that having to happen.
Right. It's a little bit of an interesting conundrum, but it's why I never stop talking about the true nose tackle, because it is a position that is kind of going extinct in the modern NFL. You don't see that many of them, but I never stop talking about the trash can full of dirt, the guy who just eats up blockers in the middle and wanting to have one. And right now we got Hankins, and that's okay for this year, but he's getting old. He's not going to be here forever. You're not going to want to lean on him forever. So, next year, if you can find one of those true nose tackles in the draft, don't dismiss them.
I think their value is going to raise with time here too, Brendan, because of the ebbs and flows. It's a great point on your part. Go back to the Rams on this one. And if you watch the Rams right now and you watch many point time this year, take a look at what they're doing with their two defensive tackles now with Donald out. Because historically speaking, even when Donald was there, most of the time you had a Michael Brockers type next to Donald, where Donald was your 3-tech. He had his 1-tech who would take the blockers. If you put the double team to him at the 3-tech, then Brockers or the 1-tech could kind of eat at that point. But now what they're doing is they have Braden Fisk, who they drafted, who's a pure as the sun is bright 3-tech. And then they have last year's Kobe Turner, who goes about 290 pounds playing the 1-tech. So these teams, like to your point, are going lighter and lighter and lighter at the nose tackle. But the problem is that what we're hearing about the way that people are going to combat this Mike McDonald defense, which has proliferated the league, is the next twist for offenses from their schematic adjustment is going to be hammering running plays and hammering the run plays up the middle. We saw some of this from McVay offensively in the steps he took this offseason to reinforce his offensive line, dial back into the 12 personnel, hammer back in those A and those B gap runs, which is where they lived against that Niner team in this last week's game, by the way. So that's, I think, to your point, just trying to solidify your point on this one a little bit. That's, yes, where you've got to be on the lookout for these guys when you can find one. They're easier. Remember, we look at these guys. There's few of them that come out, though, right? I mean, after Tavondre in this last draft, because remember, the Ohio State kid went back and you had just that Texas A&M kid, right? I mean, that was all we had of any.
And Nazir Stackhouse went back to Georgia.
Right.
He was another one who might be there. And Dante Corleone went back.
I mean, there's few that come out. And if there is some, jump on them. To your point, if there is some out there, jump on them. If you can go find a vet that's quality, the good news on this, Brendan, is at least these vets that are these 1-tech types can at least play to be 34, 35 years old. So you can maybe go and find a guy in the market if you can't find one in the draft. But back to your point on this, it needs to be a point of emphasis because the long-term future here should not be Byron Murphy is going to be your nose tackle of the future.
Right.
That's not a pathway to me to getting the most out of Byron Murphy.
Let's see here. Long lived King. Thank you for the $5. All love to the new creative, aggressive OC Grubb. Love all the new facets he brings, but in my opinion, sometimes a punt will suffice in low leverage situations.
Good point.
Yeah. I mean, that sequence at the goal line, there was a chain of stupidity on that sequence where D. Williams lets the punt hit the ground. So instead of starting the drive at the 25, you're starting at the 5, right? That was one. And then DK Metcalf pushes off Ramsey to create getting the ball inside the 5. And then you have the play call, which is a long developing play from your own end zone when you've already gotten 2 safeties this year. And you have a terrible offensive line. Then you've got Geno throwing the ball high to Charbonnet. And then some people would say Charbonnet letting the ball bounce off his hands. I don't really think he had a real chance at that catch. I don't put that on Charbonnet, really. But there was a lot wrong with that sequence that led to what I think this super chat is talking about.
Yeah, it's also being that aggressive stuff, which you love about Grubb, the aggressiveness that we saw it playing. We've seen it play through this year. I think that's that finding that right balance and discovering where it is. And it's like, Thanos balancing the blade, perfectly balanced me, and he's trying to find that spot of it. And on that play, you're right. There's a lot of things specifically just on just that play that go wrong, from the pass protection to the decision making by Geno to even Charbonnet knocking the ball up. You're taught as a football player that if it's in the hands, knock it down. Don't knock it up as if you can't catch it. But it really comes down to that. It's a 3rd and 15. They're trying to complete the 15 yards down the field. So he's looking to lock it on the backside dig when he should have just been going right to Charbonnet and the check down to long live the King's point. Just go right to the check down, take the 8 yards and get out of your own end zone and call it a day. And I think this especially has to be true, Brendan, when you do notice and look around at your defense and you go, wow, defense is playing outstanding week in and week out. They're bringing it. We can lean on this defense. There's less of a need for the offense to have to carry the day here. And you have to be instructed as an offensive play caller in that way. If you've got a defense that's this good, it does sometimes become a little bit about sometimes playing the field position game and trusting your defense and relying on them to get those stops. And I think that this has been a commonality. You would agree on all of these issues that you're seeing happen down by the goal line so far, is that they come out of, like you just said, long developing plays, getting a little too cute, not doing just the thing to be a little bit safer down there at that end. And this is a place now for them to correct and fix and not keep doing the same thing when it comes to this specific area of the football field.
Yeah, and who can really blame him? He's used to having the best offensive line in college football last year. 2 years in a row, I think they were competitors for that. What do they call it? The Hagurski Award for the best offensive line in the country?
Nagurski?
Yeah, something like that.
Bronco
So who can blame him? But at the same time,
it was open too, Brendan. The dig to lock it. It's a 3rd and 15. The first down is technically there. So I will say this as far as like Geno looking that direction and then the play design going there. They had the hole in the Miami defense. Lockett's wide open in that hole, but of course, Geno's under too much quick pressure there to get the ball off, back to the pass protection point. And don't you do one other thing just in regards to this dono, Brendan? Don't you just love as a guy who I know watched all those Washington games where he does a lot of his deep passing attack off of the back of those sort of a two-way route deal. It's like the DK dig and go route that he did, or, when he lines up guys from the slot like he would last year, where he starts the slot on kind of an out route. And then he'll suddenly, just as you get the corner biting on the out, then he takes it up the field. So he sort of gets to these deep routes in a creative way, where it might start out as one thing, but then go to the deep. Whereas so many, I think, offensive play callers, Brendan, when they're talking about getting the receiver up on that 9 route, just getting him going just deep down the field, just go straight line it, just get right down the field.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful stuff. I mean, I've said this before. If you want to get excited, watch the all 22 of the Seahawks offense and see all the cool stuff they're doing downfield that they currently cannot take advantage of because of the offensive line.
Yeah.
And think about where it could be in a couple months if this gets sorted out even a little bit.
Amen.
Yeah. There was this one clip. I can't remember what game it was from. It might have been from the Titans game, where it was like 3rd and goal from the 14 or something. And the Titans were 4 wide, and they were just showing the routes of all the receivers. They all just ran straight line into the end zone.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. And I don't know if it's because just offensive play callers don't trust their protections, because it's already a long developing play to get to a 9 route, right? It's already going to take probably a 7-step drop if you're trying to get that thing 40, 50 yards down the field. But and so if you're going to move the route where you started out and then you take it up, you got to figure that's going to add about an extra second to the pass protection to let it set up. But it's there very often, as we saw at UW, because defenses don't have it built into it that they're going to have a receiver do that sort of two-way, set me up on an outside, set me up on the inside. And if you get an aggressive defense like we caught with Miami on DK, where now your play caller anticipates it, because he's anticipating there, Brendan, the quarter half, right? He's anticipating that Ramsey's not driving to depth with DK there, where DK's not running a 9 route over the top. Miami, with their defensive play caller, saying, no, we're going to set down on this route. So there's also a little bit of that catching in them at the right time with it. But I love it. And like you say, the Titans, it's something that you see a lot of these play callers get very boring in the just straight line. Go up the field. Just go up the field deep. It's all streaks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so really exciting stuff happening there. It's not yet perfect, but it was never going to be perfect. He's never coached in the NFL before.
Yeah. Amen.
Okay, so the Lions game. Let's turn our focus to this Lions game in full now.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about this Lions team so far, they haven't had the most thrilling start to the season. I think that if you're a Lions fan, you're a little bit disappointed in the way things have come out of the gate. When you look at that Lions offense, which has been kind of mediocre through the first few games, at least compared to expectations, they're certainly not elite. What do you think has changed? Because they didn't lose any players and they didn't lose their offensive coordinator. The only player they lost was, I think, Josh Reynolds. Well, what do you think is different this year so far?
I think Josh Reynolds is not a small loss for them because he's one of those all-around wide receivers, and it's the reason that they brought Tim Patrick in there. It's a guy that is one of those vets who can play all three receiver positions, the X, the Z, Y. He's a good run blocker. He's very capable as a pass catcher, and usually you can rely on his hands. I think it's kind of ironic, quite frankly, because I think the reason he's not there anymore is because he had some bad drops in that game against the Niners in the playoffs, and that's why he's no longer there. But his loss does matter because you look at a Jameson Williams, and he's the guy that essentially steps into that role a little bit. And with Jameson, he's a guy that has had some very explosive moments, but even as you look this year, 23 targets, 12 catches, they're still finding the efficient way to get him the ball and get him worked into the offense. And quite frankly, I just don't think when you watch the tape with him, he has Goff's full trust. There's times I've even seen Jameson break open where Goff's just going back to Amon. And teams are probably squeezing a little bit down more on some of the stuff to Amon in the passing attack because you go, okay, well, who else is going to beat us? Jameson maybe, and then who? Then who? And so they are, I think, a little light out there. Laporta's beat up right now, but they've just started to kind of get him going too. He had a bit of a slow start as well. I wonder if a little bit, Brendan, on these defenses that are sweeping, and not just the defenses themselves, Mike McDonald's defense that are sort of sweeping the league, but the concepts that are maybe sweeping the league could be giving some of the Lions problems because a lot of the passing offense for the Lions is built upon those option routes, which is a lot of reading things pre-snap to post-snap, right? And if you have defenses now that have more of a preface on the changing it up pre to post-snap, that means both receiver and quarterback have to make those reads post-snap, where ideally they'd like to make them prior, right, Brendan? So you run cover 3 prior with off coverage, and then you can look over there at Amon St. Brown if he's in the slot, if he's even on the outside, you can say, okay, I got off coverage with them. They're going to drop to depth. Amon, look over at me. We're going to wink at each other and you're going to run a dig, we're both going to read it as a dig or a stop route, whatever we've dialed up through the week on them to see when we see that coverage in those moments. Well, now you're getting coverages across the board of what you see is never what you get. And I think it's hard to run those option routes post hens, if that makes sense, Brendan. It's hard to run the option routes kind of once the ball's already snapped as far as that goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, which is why my feeling about this game is that we might lose because we don't have as good a talent, but it's actually a really good matchup. This McDonald defense against that Detroit offense should actually be really favorable. And maybe it won't matter because we can't stop the run and Detroit's just going to run the ball right down our throats because they have that really good offensive line. Maybe. But there's an opportunity to really kind of take away a lot of what Detroit's going to want to do throwing the ball. And I think you've seen some teams early in the season have some success doing it. Like Detroit's had an okay offense through the first few games, but I do think there's an opportunity here to you take a look at the last few times the Seahawks have played the Lions, where we have won, but for the most part, Goff has gotten whatever he wanted against that Carroll defense, right? He just motors up and down the field, no problem. That shouldn't be the case in this game because of what you're talking about with the option routes.
Very much so, because that's the thing with Goff is that you get him on rhythm, you get him on time, you get him feeling like playing and play out. He can trust what he's seeing. That makes him that much harder to play. Versus once you make him a little nervous, once you bring the threat of the pass rush on in front of him on his doorstep, he's a much different player. And it's a night and day difference in my opinion. And you're right. Yeah, I think under that Carroll defense, I think Goff liked playing that defense, right, Brendan? I mean, there's a reason he had success both playing with the Lions and he had success when he was with the Lions against our defense, because it is what you see is what you get. And remember back in the old day with Goff too, with McVay, was that whole thing where he'd get Goff up to the line of scrimmage with 15 seconds left. So he could literally tell Goff what he needed to do with the ball post snap. And I think Goff's come a little bit further along in his development, but I think still the base problems are still the base problems there with Goff is that he does not want the game to be made hard after the ball is snapped. He wants the thinking to have already been done. And that's where you're right. I went back and watched that tape of the Baltimore Raven game, and they gave him fits with what they showed prior to the snap to post snap. He hates that coverage flip stuff. It drives him batty.
Yeah, he's trying to figure out if the sun rises in the east or not still.
That's right. He is. He's like, what if it was more southwestern? Then nobody's right, right?
Right. So I feel decent about that matchup. It is kind of unfortunate that the game's on Monday night because we're doing the show on Thursday. Usually we'd have a much better idea of who's actually going to be playing in this game. But as of right now, we don't know if we're going to have Leonard Williams. We don't know if we're going to have Jerome Baker. Boye Mafe missed practice today. And on the other side, we don't know if Laporte is going to play. I actually kind of get the sense Laporte is not going to play based on what I heard. We do know that Ragnow's not going to play. They've already confirmed that, but we don't know if they're going to have Graham Glasgow playing or if they're going to have to come up with like some third string center to snap the ball, which would be maybe really ugly. So there's still a lot we don't know about this game as of tonight, which is a little unfortunate.
Absolutely. No, it's the part of it's going to make it hard to make predictions in this game because these injuries front situation can shift in a couple of different directions on this one. I mean, no Laporta and no Frank Ragnow changes the scope of that Detroit offense in a major degree. Yeah, you got Amon, you got Jamison Williams, but now you're really going, okay, we've got a little bit more of an opening here. I mean, the Ragnow one opens it up way more for me on this one alone because he's such a tough SOB. He's one of the better centers in the NFL. He can control a nose tackle alone up there, which provides them an ability to really man you up across the board there and get guys scraping down to the second level easier. Not to mention pull guys in space. So his loss is, and like I said, because you're changing two positions with Glasgow moving over to center, that's highly impactful at that point. So that does make things a little bit more favorable to the Hawks. But it is going to be a tough matchup because we are dealing with some of our own injuries on this and guys aren't at 100%. So even if they're playing, Leonard Williams ain't playing it like prime Leonard Williams. He's going to be out there trying to get it through.
Right. I would say, I don't know if it's 100%, but I feel like the Ragnow injury is like 88% canceled out by the Murphy injury kind of, because you're losing a lot in the middle there on both sides of it. Now the kind of extra factor would be that what if they have bad snaps? Like what if Goff has a couple of fumbled snaps? That could be a big momentum change in this game.
Yeah, I mean, I might go even a little more to the Ragnow thing because with our strength of defensive line and the rotation that we flex through there so much, you hadn't put him as sort of this, pillar point to your defensive line in running this defense there. Whereas I would say with Goff and this Detroit offense, it really starts with the offensive line even before you get to Goff. And if that line starts to have some hits and dings and is lessened, and you're talking about two positions being moved, not just one, and you're talking about the potential of pressure to be able to drive up the middle on Goff, and pressure up the middle on Goff is not something he's going to want to be seeing. I think it changes even things like, you bring up, like, I think a big deal here, Brendan, is a lot of double A gap mug pressure in this game. A lot of the inside linebackers up around that A gap, just to force the protections, just to start getting Goff uncomfortable, force that center to have to make those checks and reads in that moment. I'd be leaning on that kind of stuff heavily, but I think that it's a big deal losing Ragnow, and it's a big deal. It's very close, but I give Ragnow a little bit just because I think that's a huge loss for him, is that Sewell is a big part of what makes that line work, maybe the biggest part, but Ragnow is maybe the second biggest part of what makes that offensive line go.
I would say definitely. Like, who would even be in contention for second place?
Conklin, I think. Is there?
Yeah, Conklin, but Ragnow's a monster, I think.
Yeah, he's legit a top 3 center in this league. Conklin's not a top 3 left tackle in this league.
Mm-hmm. It is a really good offensive line, though, but I'm very interested to see if the Lions, because there was also a rumor, I don't know if this is true or not, that Glasgow might also be dinged up and they can't turn to him. And if that's the case, then they're looking at somebody that's never really snapped before snapping, or they're bringing in somebody new. Like that's tough. That's really rough.
Yeah, if they're down a couple of offensive linemen in this game, I would be giving the dub to Seattle. So that's something I would say that it changes the trajectory of this game heavily, because McDonald's going to run those stack boxes. We just talked about, you're already giving Goff problems with what he's seeing from pre to post snap there and off the option routes. You're removing maybe one or two of his playmakers on the outside there, at least one with Laporta. And then you're talking about an offensive line now that's going to have to deal with these stack boxes. And I think McDonald's going to lick his chops if he sees there's down a couple of offensive linemen with some of the simulated pressures and stack boxes that he's going to run. If you've run it, you haven't even run it a lot this year so far, quite frankly. They've just been sort of like, frog in a pot on this one, bit by bit. This might be one where you crank that sucker up if you do have those backup offensive linemen, because I think, it can't be understated. If you get Goff nervous and moving his feet in the pocket, he's such a remarkably different quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Also, not practicing for the Lions this week was a Dan Skipper, who is a backup offensive lineman, but he probably would have been expected to play this week because of the Ragnow situation. He probably would have rotated in. So there is some stuff going on that interior of the offensive line that they're not happy about, for sure.
Yeah, it's not settled, and they're a much tougher matchup if they have all those guys out there. I mean, they're legitimately one of the best offensive lines in the league if they got everybody rolling. So it's a big help to Seattle, even with our injury situation, if that can be shorn up a little bit. And, hopefully Uchenna can get you some snaps out there, and then you can flex Draymond inside to keep everybody rotated nice if you need to do that.
Yeah, they got some great names on that offensive line. Frank Ragnow is a great name. Dan Skipper is a great name. Like, those are good names for offensive linemen. If you made a movie about offensive linemen,
isn't it Glasgow, like Graham Glasgow or two or something?
Yeah,
Even that's
that's a good one too.
That's a fun name as well. Yeah.
Yeah, if you make a movie about offensive linemen, you should probably consider using names like that.
And Penny Sewell sounds like a, evil, Penny Sewell is coming.
Right.
Oh my God.
That is a good one. Yeah. So let's see here. Ran in the cut. Thank you for the $4.99. With the amount of pressure we get, that'll bother Goff. Another pick 6 loading. Well,
that's what you did last year, Brennan. You came in at the end of the game. This is the Hawks team, of course, didn't like to blitz last year. You brought the Trey Brown corner blitz, gets home, get the sack. You come back the next play. Just what I'm talking about here, Brendan, to Randall Cut's point. You stack the box on the very next play after the sack by Trey Brown. Jared gets nervous. You can feel him nervous on the all-22 prior to the snap. He's like, oh my God, they're coming. They're coming for sure. He rushes the throw to the outside. Trey Brown jumps the route, pick 6. And that's why it's instrumental. You must get pressure on Goff. When Goff cut us up in recent years, it was us running the front 4 at him, the pressure getting neutralized, that front 4 not getting home, and then him able to just pick you apart. So you've got to find a way to not let that happen in this game.
Yeah, and you also had the Woolen pick 6 on him 2 years ago.
That's right.
Which was the crossing route where he just caught him from behind, which that's more of a thing where you just have a freak athlete in Woolen do something that basically nobody else can. But one way or the other, I'd say it's about time we get somebody, right? We haven't had an interception in the last 2 games. It's not okay.
I'd love to see it. This is the great week to have it happen. And boy, a pick 6 can change, as we saw with both of those 2 picks in both those 2 games. They changed the complexion of those games mightily. As we've had to fight our butt off, man. Both of these 2 last matchups to take the wins out of there. So huge if you can get that out of this one. That'd be big.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in this game, when the Lions have the ball, do you think you have Witherspoon following Amon-Ra around because he plays in the slot so much?
I would. I would keep Woolen on the outside, especially with Jameson Williams. I think that Woolen can handle. I would almost have, in my opinion, what I would do is I would have Witherspoon in the slot, and then I would have Woolen on the outside, probably traveling with Jameson Williams, because I just don't think Jameson's getting open on Woolen, in my opinion. And I think with Witherspoon, what I would do then with Amon St. Brown is I would, especially if there's no Laporta out there, I wouldn't do a full-on bracket. We know it's almost impossible at times to get the full double team down on the slot receivers. It's just a tougher place on the field versus outside receivers. But you can kind of squish down on the routes a little bit where, you can kind of give a little bit of slight help to lean to that side. And especially if you can trust a guy like, this is the benefit of being able to trust a guy like, let's say, Woolen traveling with Williamson, where he's able to just stay out there. He's handling his business, and now you can lean the rest of the coverage over to maybe Amon St. Brown. And no Laporta is that sort of third wheel to help them out. And now maybe you catch the Lions a little stuck then at that point.
Right. Who's the Lions' third receiver behind Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra now?
I'm spacing out who they had.
Yeah, it's not Josh Reynolds anymore because they lost him. So obviously they don't really use that guy that often because they use Laporta. So I guess it's Tim Patrick.
Yeah, Tim Patrick would maybe be the guy. I mean, he's late to the team, obviously, so he's still coming along, which is why I don't think that they've gone to him as much so far. But I think they've got Khalif Raymond is technically the guy that would be but you see he's got 4 targets. I mean, this is why I like to lean the coverage here a little, Brendan. You can just see if you look at those targets off the stat sheet here, you have 23 targets to Jamison Williams, you have 32 targets to Amon St. Brown, and then you have 10 targets to Laporta, 13 targets to Jamison Gibbs. It goes down very quickly, right? So you can see where Goff is locking in on where he wants to go. And this is why I would, in my way I'd go about the game plan is Tariq on Jamison, trust that matchup. If Goff wants to throw a few balls in there, I like Williams' opportunity to go get a pick. And then Witherspoon one-on-one off that slot, but then provide him a little bit of help inside and force this Lions team to go somewhere else to beat you, especially if you can stop the running game at the forefront of it. Because you got to start with stopping the running game, and then this would be sort of the secondary aspect of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, Woolen took the criticism this offseason personally. He's been incredibly locked in since the season started. I don't know if I've ever seen like Richard Sherman have a start to the season as good as Woolen so far, in coverage at least.
He's been fantastic, man. Both him and Witherspoon have been, but they've, he's come back strong. And in this defense, we thought it would fit him really well. And you could feel it in the excitement of Leslie Frazier talking about him as a traveling corner in this defense. And it's what this defense loves, man, is lockdown corners on the outside that can travel. It's one of the things that, I know a lot of defenses, Brendan, it can begin with who's my pass rusher, or who's going to be my nose tackle and my 3-4 in the center of the defense, or who's my linebacker. They'll be my captain signal call in their center to control the action. But in a lot of ways, this defense has certain beginning points with having a lockdown corner off the edge that can just shut things down out there. And he's been tremendous.
Absolutely. Zakwa, I think is how you pronounce it. Zakwa, thank you for the $4.99. Lions will still have 4 starting O-linemen, not like it's the Giants. Yeah, but if they have to like bump over a guard to play center, and then they have to bump over a backup tackle to play guard, there is a little bit of a trickle-down effect beyond just the guy you lost.
Exactly. We'll see how that goes. And you did mention Glasgow's dealing with something too. So
yeah, I think he's going to play based on what I'm looking at, but he may not be all the way there. Man, Glasgow's made 3 Pro Bowls in his career. I didn't know that. He's actually been really good.
Yeah, they put a good offensive line, man. And this is where that Goff dip, goes high on Rams when he's got the good supporting cast. Supporting cast dips down in Lions initially, gets supporting cast back to playing at his normal rate,
Right. So, yeah, obviously it's not suddenly going to become a league worst offensive line, but there is definitely a negative trickle-down effect from losing Ragnow, I think, beyond just losing Ragnow. And remember, as the center, I assume that he's the guy who's calling out like blitzes and protection schemes, and he's calling out like what the other guys are supposed to do. So there's also that. You lose that.
I all but guarantee you Goff's not doing it.
Yep.
I'd put money on that.
Right. Okay, so I think that basically covers everything with the Seahawks defense against that offense. It sucks that we don't have Murphy in all likelihood, and they really could just run the ball down our throats, but I like the matchup otherwise. I really do.
And I think the McDonald will do things structurally to not necessarily, if it goes that direction, to just allow that to be the way it's going to play out. You can get after sometimes in recent history, this McDonald defense running the ball. We've seen that this year, even at given points. But I think that he would make some adjustments, but it's where to me, I think you come down this game at times, Brendan. I think you can not always do this with every football game where you can pick a general stat and say this stat will really determine this game. But I'm hard pressed to believe that if the Seahawks outrush the Lions in this game, that they don't come through with the win, and that the team that basically is able to be the team that rushes the ball better than the other team is the one that will probably be the victor here. Is a bit out, feels to me on the surface of it coming in.
Right. So flipping over to the other side of the ball, Seahawks offense against this Lions defense. I mean, the first thing that jumps out to you right now with this Lions defense is, of course, Aiden Hutchinson, who is setting the world on fire so far this year, playing remarkably good football over there. I do remember last year, though, when Stone Forsythe kind of got one over on him, I would say, right? Hutchinson didn't do much last year.
Yeah, you had a very good, had a good game last year. You did a good job of protecting him in the attack at times, which was good on the old coaching staff in that way. But he had a good day. It held up for sure.
Right. So do you think he can replicate it this year? or do you think we're going to have to give him a lot of help to deal with Aiden the way he's playing so far?
I think Aiden's going to have maybe some times in the game where he'll get his moments. I think that the power edges are the ones that you most worry about with Stone. Those guys that lead really with power. And Hayden's not weak by any measure, but I would say that he's more of a technician in what he's trying to do out there off the edge, and that does provide Stone a better chance to kind of deal with the typical guys he might deal with if he was a left tackle, and get guys that are going to try to move around him and dip around him and bend around him, and he gets to use his length a little bit more at that point. He can be off guard a little bit, but use the length and the go gadget arms to kind of push the guy out the pocket. So I think that the matchup's not a bad one for him. I think you do have to dedicate resources to chipping. I think Charles Cross's emergence helps you out here, because if you have a situation where, Aiden's going to be matched up on Charles, you go one-on-one, we'll trust that one up. I think that they're going to have Aiden basically living on the right side. But if he's on the right side, then you draw the chip. When you work throughout this week, I would say heavily on that chip action with Stone, on how to deal with Aiden and some of what he'll do if he recognizes the chip, because Aiden's very good about recognizing the chips coming, and he'll work a spin move off of it, right, Brendan, where he uses the running back's chip and spins off the chip back to the inside. He'll start to do some anticipatory stuff with that, where you have to just be very much on your P's and Q's in how you double him up. It's why he's such a good defender. But I think you commit to that. I think also, Brendan, shock screens, right? Like you get those shock screens where the running back does a quick chip and then he goes to becoming a running back, and you go to the screen game off of it, or just go to little dump off passes to Charbonnet off of that look as well at times, to maybe manufacture stuff in the running game, because I think we've seen that the rushing attacks can be hard to come by in this game. And so you're going to have to kind of get, I think, a little bit creative and sometimes just getting those 4 or 5 yard runs. Maybe it's by a little pop pass, maybe it's Laviska Shenault. But that's be the way I'd kind of use that, though. Use that chip game to your benefit as well with Charbonnet at that point, to having it where you might have a linebacker go, oh, he's chipping, he's helping in pass pro, I can drop back in coverage. Now you come back to Charbonnet, and maybe it's only a 4 or 5 or 6 yard gain. But those kind of plays I think will be very helpful in this game.
Right. And you got to remember, you're playing in the Dome in Detroit. You're playing in a climate-controlled environment, so you should be able to be pretty clean offensively. And I'm not terribly afraid of getting in like some, manageable third down situations. I think we can handle that in this game. So I think that's also a part of it. You are expecting your offense to be able to execute at maybe a little bit of a higher level than you would if it was an outdoor game and the weather was bad. The next thing to highlight with this Lions defense right now, I think, would be Brian Branch fighting through a concussion. I think he's got long odds to play this week, personally. I don't know if I see him playing this week. I don't think they're going to mess around with a concussion on one of their best young defensive players. And his nominal backup, Efiatu Melifonwu, did not practice today with an ankle injury, so they might be down to their third string safety alongside Kirby Joseph. So is that something maybe you can take advantage of?
Well, I think definitely so. I think when it comes to the Lions, they've got a couple of key injuries here that are interesting. I think he was a limited participant, was Branch, yesterday.
He was limited today, but they always do that when players have a concussion, because when you have the concussion protocol, there are some things you can do, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good to go by the end of the week. And he just got the concussion, I think, in the most recent Cardinal game.
He did.
So I would be surprised if he's good to go 8 days later, personally.
It's a big loss. He's their best defensive back by far right now. So they would definitely have some holes at that point. He also plays a lot of slot. So if you're looking at places where you go from a JSN maybe having a bit of a tougher day with Branch out there versus not, that's a big deal. But they've got issues a little bit cornerback-wise. They've tried to reinforce it, Brendan. And, you go back 2 years ago when we played them, we were able to get after them in the run and the pass. Defense was atrocious. They've taken big steps to stopping the run, but they're going to be down Derek Barnes when they're inside linebackers, who's been a big helping part, stop that run. And they've tried to do the same thing with the secondary, right? Where Brian Branch, second-round pick, you trade for Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay and sign him to a deal. You draft Terry Arnold in the first round. But Terry Arnold has been a bit of a penalty machine. He's dealing with his own share of kind of gimpy injuries, not enough to knock him out, but he's dealing with some of his own stuff. So, quite frankly, when it comes to, from the front to back on this secondary, if there's no Branch, there's quite a bit of holes to go after in attack, especially, Brendan, you have to think they're probably going to put at the centerpiece this week. A huge part of what they're going to try to do is stop DK Metcalf. And so, You start drawing double coverage, you start getting some singled up stuff with some of these, let's call it lesser guys on the outside at corner. And Carlton Davis, I think, is still a good player for him, but he's been heavily targeted. He's given up his share of completions too on the other side of it this year so far.
Yeah, it's been a pretty poor cornerback display for Detroit so far this year, I think would be fair to say. I think that's probably their big weakness as a team right now. And I would feel really good about our passing attack against their passing defense if you can get to that point, if you can get beyond the Detroit pass rush, which throughout most of the year so far has been Hutchinson and not much else, admittedly, right? There's not a lot else going on here. They've got Aleem McNeil, who did not practice today and I think probably won't play. You got DJ Reader. I don't know what he is. I mean, he used to be really good. I don't know if he still is.
He's solid. He's not a game changer. And then they had Davenport they brought in this offseason, who was hopefully going to be the counterbalance guy. And he's not. They also have Levi Ozarike. So they've got some guys up front that can be interesting. They're not game changers. They can be problems, especially when you consider how weak we've been on the interior of offensive line. But I think that the Davenport loss was a big one because, like you said, it does really allow the spotlight to be drawn over to Aiden. And as hard as Aiden is to deal with, if you're a pass rusher that's getting that heavy amount of double team looks and that type of stuff, it just gets very hard to still be productive. We've seen the Niners work as hard as they have to find that counterbalance for Bosa, both on the inside and on the outside in that way.
Yeah, and Levi did not practice today either, so he may not play in this game. So there's a lot of injury stuff going around in this one.
A lot. That's that hard part about predicting this game with it, because we're coming into it, I think, with a little bit more know of who we don't have and who we do have. The Lions feel like they have more guys that are right on that fence, where, hey, they may be playing, but are they at 100%? How limited are they, versus, are they at like 91%, 85% of their normal selves? Because I think from all those guys, you mentioned Levi, Lee McNeil, and Brian Branch, and offensive linemen, and it's kind of a deep list.
Yeah, you also had a Rakestraw limited today with a hamstring injury. It's a hammy, right? So you never know what you're getting with a hamstring. So I don't know if he would be expected to play, because I know that he started the season as a reserve, but with all the issues they're having back there.
I don't think he played last week. So to your point.
Yeah. And while we're here, I think he'll play. Anzalone might have a concussion of his own.
He's also in concussion protocol. Yeah, their other inside linebacker. And considering you lost Barnes, if you're down to Anzalone, now they have some depth there with Malcolm Rodriguez, who's played a lot. He's undersized. You could just destroy that guy at the second level on blocks there. But Campbell, Iowa, he's a guy that they're waiting for him to kind of click into place and become what they thought he was when they drafted him in the first round. But they do have some depth there to sustain that position a little bit. Much more better than their secondary.
Yeah. I like the way those linebackers play in Detroit. They're not big names yet or anything like that, but I do like what they've got going on there. But yeah, you're right. Derek Barnes, IR. I didn't even notice that when I was looking at this earlier. That's a big non-trivial one.
Big part of what they do in stopping the run. And with the Cardinals last week, they completely shut that thing down and put it all on Kyler very early on. And it's been legitimate.
Right. So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to get at here is that this is a big opportunity for Geno Smith to start getting some national attention. It's a primetime game on the road against a team that should have played in the Super Bowl last year. And I think the stage is set in that stadium that Geno Smith has already played 2 brilliant games in this environment against this beat-up Detroit defense. I think he's got an opportunity to put the team on his back. And if he plays the way he played the last 2 times he played this Lions defense, I think he might be able to lead us to a win.
Yeah, I think you've got to try to find some ways to ease this up for Geno. I think at times in this game, especially if you don't have any running game, and that's a place with Grubb that I would like to see some more improvement from him on. I agree with you. I think this is on Geno in large part, because you're only going to run so much. But the manufactured touches stuff, Brendan, the bubble screens, the fly sweeps, the just throw to the running back as an outlet pass at times, just to test and see where the fortifications are on this defense. Give Geno some of that in there, baked within on this offense, because it probably will come down to him guiding and directing and taking the team up the field and coming up pre-snap with 20 seconds and motioning everybody this way and that way and getting everything set. But there's some plays where you can find as an offensive coordinator in between there to make the game easier on them. on him, do so. And that's especially to me, Brendan, if you're running into some of the early run game struggles that we kind of have for most of this year so far to begin things.
Yeah, it looks like we're getting Walker back. I will say that, so we should be able to
That'd be
have
huge.
more success running the ball, and that's going to be a big part of it, especially if they don't have Anzalone, and they don't have Barnes, and they don't have McNeil, and they don't have Onwuzurike. You should be able to shove the ball
And then
down
on
their throat a
Branch
little bit. Yeah, no Branch too while we're at
and
it.
no Rakestraw.
Yeah, quite potentially.
Rakestraw's like a third rounder for him, so it's no small loss. That's part of the
And
rebuilding of the secondary.
don't get me wrong, this guy gets hurt every year, so it's whatever. But Emmanuel Moseley was supposed to be their big get on defense in the secondary, right?
They tried to throw a lot of numbers at the secondary, so it's no doubt frustrating Detroit because it's one thing as a team if you're turning kind of a blind eye to something and you're just kind of ignoring, hey, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. It's another thing when as a team, that like they reinforced the run game woes in the last couple of years from where it was. Because remember that first game we were more, I think, able to really get after them in the run game. But now they just can't seem to get this. Jeff Okudah was here. They moved on. They had the other guy out there, Sutton. They've run through some corners trying to make this fixed. So it's not from a lack of effort or them attention on their part to try to get it fixed.
Right. So let's see here. Okay, we got this one right here. Long lived King. Thank you for the $5 once again. If all else fails, we can count on Dan Campbell being unnecessarily over aggressive on fourth downs.
I do think that this is a place that the analytics haven't quite caught up to on this, that some of these guys that are driven like Dan are driven off that offensive explosive period that we had been in, that were driving that whole being informed of how you should go for fourth down more often. I think those analytics will change if we look at it through more of the viewpoint of where offenses have been the past year and 3 weeks.
Yeah, generally speaking, I feel like Campbell usually gets it right when he's making these fourth down decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if in the coming years we'll find out that he was being a little over the top. Like a lot of people killed him for some of the fourth down stuff he did against the Niners. I thought what he did on fourth down against the Niners was fine. And Josh Reynolds just needs to make, catches that he almost always makes. But, there was like that moment when we were playing the Patriots. Remember, we had the ball in the red zone. It was 4th and half a yard. And you can either go for it and go for a touchdown to win or kick the field goal to go to overtime. I knew the analytics wanted to go for it, but I actually didn't want to kick it in that situation. And I think the team admitted that, yeah, we knew about the analytics, but we decided to ignore them there. And I think there is something to be said for that human element where you just don't know if people are going to it's just a little bit harder to execute in those situations, I guess is the way to put it.
It is. And I think if you're seeing the offense tampered down like we have seen recently, you got the team that can be ahead of this and adjusting off of that for where people are operating off of kind of data that's maybe 3 years old. There's a place where you can maybe get a bit of an advantage in that. And the decision you're just specifically talking to is the going to more of the old school conservative approach is how the Hawks took it in that situation. And I agreed with that. I thought that's the right call in that moment in kind of, feeling the lay of the land and where you're at in that game and what's carrying you through that game.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm sure that Dan Campbell will go for it on fourth down at least once in this game. Statistically, it's overwhelmingly likely.
Amen. Good news for the Seahawks is that they've been very good on fourth down this year.
I'd say so. Been pretty good in those short yardage situations. Been pretty good in those crucial moments of the game. So what else can really be said about this Seahawks offense going up against Detroit's defense? Is there anything else in this game that you think can be exploited?
I think it's you using your playmakers like you've shown so far. You can find some weaknesses. I mean, whether they're able to run all their starters out there in the secondary or not. I was talking about with Terry and Arnold. I think that he is a grab machine. He's been the most penalized cornerback in the NFL to start this year off. I don't think he's at 100%. I want to test him like hell. I want to, test this Lions team with DK, where the last 2 years, DK's ripped the top off this defense, and he's done it from the outside. I want to drive him into the slot. I want to move him into motion in this game where I want to see if the lines are going to draw so much attention to him where the attention will even carry over when he's in the slot. The attention will even carry over when he is in motion. And if you can do that, then that's going to open up so much other stuff for other people. And Geno will be able to designate his one-on-ones to other areas at that point. And I would like to see them, lean on that. I'd like to see Laviska get in here this week, Brendan. I think it's going to be hard finding, running ground. You're going to have a loud stadium, snap counts, a little bit of a jump by the Lions to get back there. I think the run game is going to be hard pressed. We haven't seen them utilize Laviska Shenault at all really this year, or have a plan of attack with him. And he's a unique player on this roster who I think can really help you when there's some tough sledding moments in games, offensively speaking. So I would look to kind of lean into those two ways. Don't force it into DK in this game if they're going to draw those doubles that way. Target those other guys, because you're going to have a mismatch out there. If JSN's out there with I would even say Branch to a certain degree. I'm gonna attack that matchup. I know Branch is a good player, but I like JSN's chances in that matchup if he goes down the slot. And with Branch, it's a little safety slot stuff they work in between.
Yeah, their nominal nickel corner is Amik Robertson. I don't know how often he gets on the field, though, because they do like to put Branch in the nickel a lot.
Yeah. And if that guy's out there, attack him all day. So Geno's got to be on the spot with reading his mismatches on the field. Grubb's got to be on it and helping Geno where he can, because it's going to be a hard game for Geno, I think, where you're going to have to score your share of points. He's got to kind of carry a little bit of this load, as I think the rushing attack has shown it's still finding its footing. So just stay in that pocket and give him the easiness as you can there with Grubb. And from that's where I get to the Laviska stuff. That's where I get to the Charbonnet check down stuff, where it doesn't have to be elaborate. Just find a way to get some quick touches into these guys at times. And if it only gets to 3 yards, it only gets 3 yards. At the very worst case scenario, you're getting yourself into 3rd and makeable. You're not in that 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, where those Lions pin the ears back and you're in your troubled waters. Get yourself into those 3rd and 5 and 4 so you can keep the chains moving. And more importantly, Brendan, you can't lose the time of possession here, because Detroit's going to want to run from the opening gun of this game. They're going to want to run. And so that means that if you're not getting consistent drives and moving chains, you're going to start losing that time of possession. You don't want to get in the 3rd quarter with an understaffed defense that's been wore down over the course of the game because you weren't getting those chains moving consistently offensively.
Yeah, I like all of that. I think that all sounds really good to me. I think there's another really good chance to maybe make a 50-yard play like we've had the last 2 games because of what's going on with the Lions with their safeties. If they really are down to their 3rd string safety, then I'm looking for another 50-yard touchdown play to Metcalf maybe. And that's such a valuable thing in the NFL to be able to make that play, because a lot of teams just can't do it. A lot of teams are forced to trickle the ball down the field 8 yards at a time because they can't take the top off. And with the way defenses are playing right now, everything is kind of designed around keeping teams from being able to do that. But if this is going to be one of the few teams in the league that can consistently take the top off, then that's such a great asset to not have to execute on 10 plays in a row. To just get it all in one big burst is a big deal in this current league.
And it will eventually help out the run game, because it eventually will slide those coverages back to being hyper aware about the deep shots, because we know modern iterations of defenses have an obsession with, keeping that big play tapped. That they'll give up the run to keep the big play neutralized. And so it does have a cascading effect downwind of this too. If you can show teams this much on tape of how quickly you are able to take that top of the defense off, where it goes from Brendan, a Geno Smith DK season, you might have 3 of those throws over the course of the year, to now you're seeing 9, 10, 11, 12 of those throws over the course of a year. And now it's actually a staple part of the offense. And now you have to play that legit. Not that teams weren't already with the double team brackets to DK and all of that type of stuff, but it does free up other things. And you're right. I don't think that there's a lot of teams out there that have these kind of guys that could do that. You would think that there are, but when you go back and really go through it, I mean, like a Buffalo Bill team, for instance, that's kind of manufactured their receiving core this year after they moved on from Diggs. Who's their guy taking that top off, really? They got good route runners. They got a guy that can go up and high point the ball, but is there that guy that really does put the fear of the heart, fear in your hearts at that point, in that way, on that, defensively, like a guy like DK would? No, there isn't. So it's part of why I love DK so much. Such a useful and unique weapon that we have here on this team and what he's able to do.
Yeah, and that touchdown against Miami, that's not a busted coverage. It's not like they just forgot to cover him. He just kind of split the defense in a way that they couldn't keep up with, because he is so fast, because that's how hard DK is to deal with. And that's why I kind of have gotten to the point where I just kind of shut down when people start talking about trading Metcalf. That's a guy I want to be a Seahawk forever. I want that to be one of my forever players, because It's so hard to find a guy who can physically do that.
It really is. He is a unique kind of one-on-one of that in that way. And it's not just people get caught up, Brendan, with the talent of receivers in the draft every year. And because it's so talented, then it's like this whole running back thing trickling down to the receivers, because there's so many good ones, then don't pay one, save the money, and then go pay something else. But DK to me should be a lifelong Seahawk. I love he's having the year he is here now, and that it seemed like the press conference that he was talking today, he just seems even a little bit more at ease and happy. It helps when you're having maybe the best start to your career this year so far. But I want him as a lifetime Seahawk. And I think you're right about that play there. He gets knocked a lot, and it gets talked a lot about his ball skills and high pointing the ball. And, he had to play in this game where he was able to, with I think Ramsey in coverage, to sort of kind of moss the guy on the play. It wasn't deep down the field, but he essentially just plucks the ball out of air over the top while the corner's head's turned. And DK's talked about how he's worked on that stuff. But the part that people don't always give him a lot of credit, and certainly like when people love Calvin Johnson's a great player, but I think that there's actually an argument to be made that while Calvin might be better than DK at high pointing the ball, DK probably a better route runner than Calvin Johnson. And you saw it on that play where he's running that dig and go. And that's what you're talking about, is he cuts that route in on that dig, and you've got to sell that to drive that safety up. And that's what happened, is that safety climbs up because he's thinking the dig's coming, and they're in that quarter half coverage, and DK runs the route well and then gets open deep. It's the speed, but it's also the route running that opens that play up. And DK has steadily improved his game in that aspect of thing, in my opinion, every single year.
Right. And I suspect that when they restructured Metcalf's contract right before the season started, they did it because they know they're going to extend him in the offseason, and they don't even really have to worry about the money getting moved around that much. And DK might know that, which is another reason why he probably feels pretty good. He knows that long-term money is coming.
I agree with you on that. I think that they set the stage for that very thing. And I think that there's a little bit of that. Look, DK, we're not going to renegotiate with 2 years left. If there was a guy we wanted to break the rule for on this, you'd be the guy. But we are going to be with you as the high priority thing as we move into next offseason. You'll be one of our first orders of business. And it'll be great to see, man, because he's having the best start to a Seahawk receiver in your history. And you've got guys like Largent and Baldwin and Lockett and many, Brian Blades. Many receivers had great starts to their career. So love to see it.
I mean, he's almost got the best start to his career of any receiver in NFL history.
It's very close. It's very close. That Calvin Johnson, comparison I always make, Brendan, coming into this year through 5 seasons. DK technically has more catches than, not technically, he does. He had more catches coming into this year than Calvin Johnson did. And he was right there on Calvin Johnson's footing through the first 5 years as far as yards receiving and touchdowns. I think he's 6 away on touchdown receivings, and he's like 400 yards away on receiving yardage. So he's right there with him step for step. And it just speaks about not just how good DK is, but how he's actually been great, the Seahawks team.
Mm-hmm. Right. So back to this game, though, real quick. Is there anything else need to be said? Lions, like, they have their kicker and everything. Like, there's nothing special teams wise to talk about.
I think trick plays, with Campbell, he's going to run it loose and wild a little bit. You got hit with a trick play last year, I believe, with Witherspoon, as they caught the rookie in a rookie moment. So, beyond
flea flicker. Yeah.
Flea flicker. So just be on point for that on that side of it. And maybe, hey, we keep waiting for Grubb to whip out his trick play stuff, man. You promised me that from the UW stuff. You said that stuff was coming, Brendan. I ain't seen hide nor hair. Hide nor hair of a trick play.
They're saving it for the good teams, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
We're just building 3 games, they were like, we didn't need it. We didn't need it.
They're building tendencies, Brendan. You can't get them to step wrong unless you show them where to step wrong, right? Oh, it's an outside run. It's out right. Oh, no, it's a flea flicker.
Mm-hmm. So it'll be there eventually. And also, I think a big part of it is you need to crawl before you can walk. And the offense has failed at some of the basic elements of offense so far, with the blocking being so bad. Like, it's hard to run a flea flicker when your offensive line can't block. So I get it.
I get it too. It's not a huge deal, but I'm sure at some point or another he's going to be frothing at the mouth to get one of those plays out.
All right. So what do you got? How do you feel about this game right now? Well, give me a score.
Well, 2 days ago I had it as a loss, but I mean, it's such a tough one to predict because the injury situation, funnels this so much. If Ali McNeil plays, Levi Zaruki plays, Anzoli plays, Branch plays, if those guys are out on the field and they're really only down Major League Rag now, and you get Laporta out there, I think it's probably a close loss for us because I just don't know if we're going to be able to hold up against that rushing attack that's going to be so dedicated. But if they're down even a couple of those guys, I think we take the game, and it starts to be one where we might even be able to take it by, rather than being a little bit comfortably, not saying blowout, but that if they're down that many guys as they are, and even if these guys are playing, you start to wonder about how well are they going to be able to play. Certainly not at 100%. And that leads me back around to the line of going, well, okay, then we're on more of like not even just even keel ground with the injury front. They're in a little bit much worse shape injury front wise. So now we've got an advantage now in our back pocket. And as we're walking in this game, Brendan, Vegas has got this as basically an even game. They're giving the 3-point advantage to the Lions because of the home field. So that's where I'll say I go, it's a 30-27 game. It will depend upon that injury situation of who wins or not, just that very thing. So if Lions come in really healthier than they're looking on paper, I think they can edge us out. I think, Brendan, they're going to have that, we talk about that silent motivation thing that factors in at times, teams being motivated because of they're coming off this. Like I always reference a couple of years ago, remember that Bears win against the Niners on the road to open the season. And then they were coming back to play us in week 2. And you knew you were going to get this like Herculean effort from the Niners, more so than you would normally typically even get. And that's the way I feel with the Lions here. You got Campbell. He's going to have that team hyped up. They beat our ass twice how he'll do it, Brendan. He'll be in that locker room. They beat our ass twice in a row in our house. You're going to let that happen again. It'll be a bit of that. But it does come down to that for me. Do they have just one injury too far on it that allows us to have that crack to open through?
Yeah. With the way the injury stuff is going right now, with the sense that I'm getting, and this is not based off anything objective because it can't be, because we don't know. We're not doctors. We're not in the medical room checking on these players ourselves.
Yeah.
I feel like Seattle's going to win like 23-20. But if they get Laporta back, or if they get Brian Branch back, or if their offensive line is fine outside of Ragnow, if one of these 4 or 5 things happen, I feel like that kind of equalizes things a little bit to where I'm kind of flipping it to something like 26-20 Detroit. So I know it's kind of lame, but we just don't have enough information right now.
There's not usually as many guys on that fence line on the injury front like the Lions are facing too, right? And it's not just them at the fence line. It's also no Derek Barnes, no Ragnow. Like those guys are out for sure. And then you have all these other guys that are in kind of this gray area as to whether or not they can play. And that's 8 or 9 bodies difference, where if half of those bodies aren't playing, that makes a huge difference on the overall outcome. But it also makes a huge overall outcome if those guys are playing. And we're not in that same mode with so many guys kind of on that line, are we, Brendan? I mean, we've got a couple guys where you're like, well, Leonard Williams maybe on that, Jerome Baker maybe on that, but
yeah, I think the big one's Nwosu. If we don't get him back, that's going to start to take a toll, I think.
But even that one, I feel good with, because you got him out on Wednesday practicing, which is always usually that key day. And you got him you're not going to ask him to come out there and have to play like, 40 snaps. He'll come out and play like the 15 to 20 snap thing, where it's just to get him out there and get him, back to getting kind of up to runs. You get him you kind of even still at least know you're getting a little something from Uchenna. Whereas with Lions on some of these guys, you're getting anything from Aleem McNeil, Levi, Anzioli, Branch. What is Laporta? What's the status on those guys? So it's hard to predict on this one. This is one of the tougher ones coming in to predict with all the factors involved, and that'd be that way without the injuries coming into play.
Yeah, I'll have a much better idea by game time.
Davenport's another one. I mean, that's their big edge that they want to counterbalance. We don't draft the edge. We're going with Davenport. He'll be the guy to take the heat off Hutchinson. Okay, now he's out. Now we can put the heat on Hutchinson. How does that? It's so many little things with this one that make this one tougher to me.
Yeah, by the time I make my game preview video, which will probably be Sunday, I'll have a much better idea of what's going on here. Mm-hmm. But right now, it's just hard. Like, technically, we don't even know about Walker. Like, he'll probably play, but what if he had a setback today? What if he has a setback tomorrow?
And maybe the game plan is to have it more like he gets 8 carries or something, where they limit him a little bit and they go back to Charbonnet with it. It's just a tougher one to read the road on this one in advance. We got a blind corner we're coming up to.
Mm-hmm. But this is why you build up that 3-0 buffer to start the season, right?
This is where you take care of business against the teams you should beat. You know, we lamented this through the years, man. We should have that win. If we had this win, we'd be in the playoffs. If we got this win, we'd be in so much better shape. Oh, we'd be contending with number one seed if we just didn't take care of business. You took care of business against the lesser opponents. Yeah, you're going to want to get quality wins. Yeah, you're going to want to beat tough teams this year to prove yourself as well. But you have set the stage so nicely here in this way. And just look at our division, Brendan, with everybody at 1 and 2 and what they're looking at as far as behind the 8 ball and their injury situation. And I think a lot of them have some tougher schedules, at least in the case of the Niners and Rams, tougher schedules they're looking down the line on here as it stands.
Yeah, and if you do take the loss, then that's too bad. But you're also looking at a game next week against the Malik Neighbors List Giants, probably. So, you know, you're going to stack up those wins in all likelihood, and you're going to get it done, and you're going to win enough games to be involved at the end of the season. That's what matters.
Especially a first year of McDonald that we thought was going to be a transitionary state. You know, Vegas has got us at 7.5 wins, and you get to that place of it. You're on the right road. You're rolling. Who knows what happens this year? Anything can happen. Who knows if it, and the other part we're kind of anticipating here a little bit, Brendan, is that this thing's going to get better as we go along, not worse. You would think that the systems would get more better understood as you go along. You think you'd get the details finer tuned as the year goes along. So you're expecting just upside here. You're expecting it almost to get even better as long as the injury stuff can hold.
Yeah, and we certainly know the offensive line can't get worse, right? They can only get better because there's no further down they can go.
That's for sure. And the good news this year, Brendan, is at least with Geno, you know, he's like I think he's got the third fastest quarterback at getting the ball out of his hands. So at least with Grubb, he has built in some ability to protect Geno here, both with his control at the line of scrimmage and getting the ball out of his hands to lessen some of those hits versus, I think, some of the old Waldron offense, which would had the quarterback just hanging in there tough, trying to, you know, take hits and take shots down the field a little bit.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think that'll do it for tonight's show. Sorry we couldn't get the video working, everybody, but we still had well over 300 people in here for most of the night. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Brandon, thank you for doing this with me. We'll do it again next week for sure.
My pleasure, my man. Let's go get this dub. Let's go 4-0 and keep the good times rolling.
All right, so thank you, everybody, for showing up. I will probably go live on Twitch a little bit later tonight. We're going to try to finish up overtime in Dead Rising, so check me out over there if you want to. Check out the Hawks Nest channel if you are on mine. Check out my channel if you are on the Hawks Nest stream. And look, all there is to say right now is that this team looks like they might be a little ahead of schedule. This was not supposed to be the year. This was not necessarily supposed to be the year where you win the division. Not supposed to be the year where you have a good playoff seed, but there are some signs that we might be a little ahead. I don't think we can safely say that we're there, but we are further along than people would have expected, and we are 1 win away. If we can get this win in Detroit on Monday night, people are going to start paying attention. So let's get behind the boys. They're missing a lot this week. They've got a lot of things going against them this week, but we can get behind them. They can gut out a tough win and put us on the national map. So let's say it and get out of here. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.